A very good morning to one and all. I, Anvita Suvarna, welcome you all as we have approached towards the end of the Virtual Development Program. STP is an initiative by the Information Technology Department with an aim to help students in grooming their overall personality and bringing out the innovative techniques with mentors guiding us on the same. Our topic for today is React, and I would now like to give my heartiest welcome to our speaker, Mr. Swapnil Mistry. It gives me immense pleasure to state that he is an alumni, batch 2019 of our college, from our very own Information Technology Department. He is currently working as a senior software engineer at Simpress India and has given a number of seminars in different colleges as well. So, without any further ado, I request Mr. Swapnil to commence with a session.
Yeah, hi guys, good morning. Am I audible, right? Because most of the time we need to just confirm that we are audible or not. So, am I audible? Hello. Hello.
Yes, yes, you are Swapnil.
Hello.
Hello?
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes,
I
yes,
just,
you are Mr.
yeah. Okay, sounds good. So, thanks for letting me in. As Anvita said, that my name is Swapnil Mistry, and I have been working in Simpress from past 1.6 years, and currently I'm working as a senior software engineer. So today's session is, quietly going to be the beginner session, like what's actually React and why you should use React. Apart from that, what's the difference between React and other frameworks available in the market, right? So without jumping most of the time, let's just start jumping. Let's just start jump on it. So let me just quickly share my screen. Yeah. So I will just quickly share my screen. Okay. So is the presentation visible? Like if someone can comment on the group or something like that. Okay. Sounds good. So we'll be starting on with React. But before starting with the React, I would like to just, give you a brief, like what are the contents which we'll be going through in this session, right? Because we will need to provide you with the starting point that what actually React is and what are different terminologies in React, right? So here are the quite contents, like these are not quite much contents. Again, I will be just saying that this is the beginner series on React, right? So what we'll be doing here is we'll be just set up a couple of things, like how can you set up your React project. So basically this will give you the starting point that how can you set up your project and get going with it. Apart from that, we'll also go through a couple of fundamentals in React, like what are React components, what are React states, what are React props, and when can you use them. And we'll be just showing you the quite a small demonstration, like the hands-on session, if you guys want to follow, or you can just go through the things and ask a question if you have any, right? And after that, if we just have some times, then I will be just showing you a couple of minor React apps which you can get started with, and we'll also sharing you the code base about the same. Yeah. So moving ahead to the next slide, what things are required for React? The very first thing required is nothing but the Node.js. What's actually a Node.js is nothing but the package manager, and I believe that you will get more details about Node.js in upcoming sessions, where you have complete session on what's actually Node and how can you use Node. But for the time being, in order to understand that what Node is, Node comes with a package manager which is called as npm, and it's called as Node package manager. And what this will do is this will help you to set up your React project. So for the time being, if you just go ahead to this website, like if I go ahead to the website over here, so you can find the installation links from over here. So this is the Node.js official's website, and you can find a couple of installers over here, 64-bit or 32-bit for Windows, for Mac, or for Ubuntu, like open source. So you can just go ahead and download the version of your choice or one which is compatible with your systems. If you are working on Windows, you need to just click over here and you can see at the bottom that the installation has started. So for me, it's already installed. So I'm not going to install this. Apart from this, the second part is nothing but the text editor. So for me, I'm using Visual Studio Code. So this is one of the text editor which I use for writing up the code. You can go for other of text editors of your choice like Atom or Sublime Text or something like that. Again, I will be pinking you the links after the session so that you can just go ahead and install things and get started with it. Okay. So let's just go ahead and move with the next slide. Now, what's actually React? Now most of them might be confused at what's actually React and why to use it. So here's the simple definition of React, that what actually React is. So React is a declarative, efficient, and flexible JavaScript library for building user interfaces. Now, what do you mean by user interfaces? So let's say we are going live on YouTube, right? And you are seeing couple of things on your screen itself, like the video, the remaining playlist, and all those stuff. So when you go on YouTube, you see couple of things. So if I go to YouTube over here, let's just go to YouTube and see what's actually a user interface looks like, right? So if I go to YouTube, you see couple of things over here, like the sidebar, the header, the search bar, and all these are nothing but the UI elements. Like this is nothing but the user interface which YouTube has built. So what React does, it helps you to build some user interfaces quite easily by breaking down into small chunks of codes. So that's what the next line says. It lets you compose complex UIs and small and isolated pieces of code called as components. So what's actually a component? We will be taking a look at the components in the later session when we jump into coding. But for the time being, you can assume that components are nothing but a small part of code or a separate file which can be useful for implementing couple of functionality or serving couple of functionality. So if I just go ahead and just come to YouTube and try to describe that what actually a component might be here. So if you can take a look at the search bar over here, so search bar can be one component, like you can keep it in a separate file. And what will be the responsibility of the search bar over here? To search a video, right? So this can be one component. Apart from that, when you get all the results after searching on the search bar, you can create another component which will be responsible for displaying the files or the videos which you see over here, right? So this can be other component or something like that. So these are nothing but components. Okay. Apart from that, let's just go ahead and check what actually a component looks like, right? Because since we'll be going on the hands-on part after a couple of minutes, we want to make sure that what actually component is and how the component looks like. So just to give you a brief, there are eventually two types of component. The first one is the functional component, and the other one is the class component. So the component or the snippet which you see in the PPT is nothing but a functional component. And the reason why I'm showing you the functional component is that the class components are eventually, going to be deprecated. Like you won't be getting much support for this, as the developer community is mostly going towards the functional component in upcoming release and all those stuff. Right? And there are a couple of advantages of functional components, like they are easy to implement. Like rather than declaring a class, you can just declare a function and start writing your code. Okay, so this is how actually a functional component looks like. So as you can see that we are declaring a function with the name of the function, right? And the function is accepting couple of parameters over here. The first parameter which you see is nothing but a prop. Now again, as I said, I will be just giving you a brief like what actually a prop is. And you can see that the function is doing nothing but just returning an HTML, right? So this is nothing but the HTML, and I'm assuming that you might be quite familiar with HTML and a couple of coding stuff like C, C++. So this is nothing but the HTML template which the function is written. Okay, so this is just basic about the functional component, like what's actually the functional component, how the functional component use likes. Apart from that, if you take a closer look, we have couple of additional fields supplied to the div which is already there, like the HTML tag which is there. So you see that we are passing a class name with a specific string. The class name usually is responsible for providing couple of styling aspects. Like if you again go to YouTube, let's just go to YouTube, right? So if I say that I am having a component which is called as search bar, and I want to provide some styling to the search bar, right? So I can just provide a class name, create a style file, and just type the style of that specific component. Yeah. And yeah, so by default, I just forgot to give you a brief, like who actually developed React. So React was eventually uh, developed by Facebook in 2015, and then eventually the developer communities got going, and we see lots of feedbacks and all those stuff over here. Like lots of things are being developed. So if you go to this website, like this is the official React's website. I already have this opened on my system. So this is how actual React websites look like. I mean, the documentation page looks like. So, sorry for it. So if I go over here, so react.org is the official domain name for them. And you can see a couple of things like what's actually React and what are the advantages of React, how React is declarative. So you can just go through a couple of things over here. So I will also share this link after the session. And they actually provide lots of things like they provide docs, they also provide tutorials that how can you create small and tiny applications. So if I just click on get started, you see that it gives you the starting point, like why to try React, what are the concepts of React, how can you set up your project, and all those stuff, right? And if you take a look at the right hand side of the screen, it just gives you a couple of things like how can you add React to your website, right? How can you create a new React application? By the way, we'll be taking a look at this in a short time, like how can you create a new React app, and couple of many other concepts like what are the props, what are the states, and we will be also taking a look at all these things in a small time, right? So let's just jump back to the presentation. So this is how actually the functional component looks like, and a brief overview of React. So till now we have discussed like what's actually React, what terminologies we are going to look in React, like what are states, what are props, what are components, how actually the component may look like. And there may be couple of additional parameters we'll be writing in the component, like what are states, how can you actually fetch the data, and all those stuff, right? So we'll be taking a look at this. So this is one of the project, the dummy project which I just created. Like this is nothing but the YouTube search app. So this is basically made in React, and you can see that there are a couple of components over here. So the one component is nothing but the nav bar. The other component is nothing but the search bar. The other component you see is nothing but the video player component. So each and every component over here serves a purpose. Okay. So as I said earlier with the example of YouTube, that search bar component is responsible for searching couple of videos, right? So similarly, this component will be also responsible for searching YouTube related videos. Then we have something called as video list component. So whatever results I get from the API which I am calling will be displayed in the video list component. And apart from that, we have another component which is called as video player component. So what really happens is that whenever you click on any of the videos available in the list, that video should be played inside the video player component. So video player component will be responsible for playing the videos for you guys, right? So as you can see over here that we have not kept everything inside a single file. So we have composed the entire UI into small chunks, as I said earlier, like in the definition of React, that what's actually React and why we should use React, right? So as you can see that things are quite composed into small chunks, into components, and how these components come together to form the entire UI. Okay, so this is how actually the components will look like, and this is how you go on building a couple of components. Okay, so now I just have a small image like the comparison between the React and couple of other frameworks available in the market. So I'll just zoom in a bit. Okay, so if you take a look at this, the orange line shows the React and the blue line shows the Angular. So Angular is also another framework which can be used for building web applications along with React. But if you take a look at the difference in the graph, that the total number of downloads in past 2 years, definitely this is the old chart. Now the number of downloads might have grown. I was not able to get the latest graph, but this gives you a brief like why you should use React, right? So you can see that it's a couple of difference between the downloads of the Angular and React. The orange graph corresponds to the downloads with respect to React, and the blue one, corresponds to the one with Angular. So there's a significant difference between the downloads, and that's the reason that most of the companies are, shifting towards using React. Okay, so this is one of the things which I just wanted to show you. And then what's next? Like as I said earlier, that we want to just get started with React. So how can you set up your React project, right? So the very first thing which you need to do is you need to install Node on your system, which I said earlier, right? And once the Node is installed, you need to verify, right? The Node is installed globally on the system. Now, what do I mean by global is that Node should be, accessible from anywhere in your system. So let's say if I just open terminal over here, right now I am in any other directory, right? And I want to check whether the Node is installed or not. So what you can do is you can just go and type in this command like node -v. So what this gives me is this gives me an output. So if this not visible, let me just maximize my screen so that it can be visible properly. Yeah, so what you can do is you can just go ahead and type node -v, or possibly node hyphen version. So hyphen v is the short form to get the version, and if you want to write, you can just use any of these two commands to check whether the node is installed on your system. So as you can see, you are popped up with a value. So this is nothing but the version of the node installed on your system. For me is 12.18.4. For you, it may vary depending upon the latest releases. So once you have installed Node on your system, you can just go ahead and type this command on your terminal to just cross verify that Node is successfully installed on your system. Okay. So once this is done, now I want to create a React project, right? So how can I create a React project? So you can just go ahead in the directory which you want and just type this command npx create React app and your project. So if I just go ahead to couple of directory, if I can, let me just open another terminal. Just a second. Yeah, so this is the directory which I have created for conducting the webinar today, right? And this is the directory called as webinar. So let's say I want to create a React project in this application. So this is my directory name. And as I said that what you need to do is you need to just go ahead and paste this command like npx create React app and your project name. So if I go over here and type npx create React app and your project name. So if I write demo and if you click on enter, it will just start getting all the resources required for setting up your React project. So this will be automatically setting up your project. You need to just click on enter, right? And it's already, you can see that things has been started, but I already have created this dummy template. So you need to wait until these things get over. And once this thing gets over, you will see a new directory called as webinar template. So for me, I just named that project as webinar template. For you, it may vary. So what you can do is you can just go inside that directory and open your code editor, like the one I said. For this, I'm using Visual Studio Code. You can use Atom or Sublime Text or something like that. And now once you go inside this directory, you see a couple of files. So we'll be also taking a look at these files, like what actually are these files. So if I just go ahead and just open my code editor. So as I said, I'm using a Visual Studio Code. So you can see a couple of things over here inside that specific structure. But apart from that, there's another tool which you can use for creating a React project, which is called as Yarn. So this is an alternative to Node. If you don't eventually want to use Node, you can use Yarn. So the reason why I'm giving you an alternative is that Yarn is quite much faster compared to Node. So it may possibly take 10 minutes to create a project on npm. Like creating a project on npm, it may eventually take 5 minutes to create the project using Yarn. So it's on you. You can either go for Yarn or either you can go for Node. Any one of them is suitable. So it's depend. It completely depends on the user choice. So for this project, like the one I created today, like the webinar template, so I used Yarn for creating the template. Again, the syntax is quite similar. So what we did was we just wrote something like this: npx create react app and followed by your app name. And for creating a project with Yarn, you can just write Yarn create. Again, the same syntax, but notice that there's a difference between create react app syntax. So initially, while creating the app using Node, we just had a hyphen in between, but while creating the application through Yarn, we don't have a hyphen between create and react, right? So create react app and your app name again. So if I click on enter, it will just go ahead and start creating the new project. Again, I just have already things installed, so I'm not going through this. Right. So once the project has been set up on your system, you will be seeing couple of files inside that directory. So let's just go through this couple of things over here. So the very first thing which you see over here is nothing but node modules. So let me just maximize things if it's not visible. Yeah, yeah. So very first structure you see is nothing but node modules. So by the way, this is exactly what you see over here. I have just opened the same in the code editor of my choice, right? So the very first file which you see over here is nothing but node modules. So what are these node modules? Like if I say in a short, like each and every project you developed have couple of libraries. So you might be using couple of third-party libraries for fulfilling couple of actions rather than writing them from scratch, right? So you will be installing those libraries into your node project, and all those libraries which are already installed on your project will appear inside node modules. So you can see there's couple of files in it. So these files are being created when you just initially started while setting up your project. It is nothing but typing the command npx react app or yarn create react app, right? So we are not concerned about these files right now. We need to just keep in mind that in order to make sure that your react projects run, node module should be there. You should not delete these files at any cost, because this folder contains all the libraries which you are using for starting up your react project, right? So we will be leaving this folder apart for the time being. We will be just going through couple of the other folders, like the public folders. Now what this public folder is responsible is for, you see that couple of images and all those stuff over here. So what are these images? So this folder can be used for providing statically type contents. Like if you want to display images on your website, you can use this folder, like adding your custom images and then importing them and using them on your website. So this folder can be useful for that purpose. But if you take a closer look, we have and another file which is called as index.html. And what is index.html? So this basically contains the heart of the react project. And I'll be just going through this file a couple quick. So this is just nothing but the basic HTML file. So you are declaring couple of HTML text, like this is HTML, this is head, and what you want to display on your title, and couple of other things. Like, so what you want to display on the title, what's the head, what should be the body of your website. So each and every website has a specific body. So whatever contents which you see, like if you go to YouTube, right, so everything is rendered inside a body. The title which you see over here, like YouTube, this is nothing but the title, right? And whatever you will see over here, like the search bar, the search results, or the sidebars like home, trending, subscriptions, all these things are rendered inside the body, right? So whenever you write react project, everything will be rendered inside this body, like this body tag. And inside this body tag we have a couple of other things. We see that we have another HTML tag which is called as div, and the div is having an ID, right? So what does this ID mean? So this ID eventually has certain significance, but I'll be showing you that what's the significance of this ID. So whatever contents you write or whatever components you create, right, will be encapsulated inside this div. So let's say I have created one component called as a.js. Yeah, by the way, I forgot to mention that React uses JavaScript and couple of HTML. So React uses JavaScript for handling logics and HTML to display the templates. So whatever file you create will be stored with the extension of like .js. So this is quite something similar to see if people don't have much brief about the JavaScript files or all those stuff. So you can consider some example like C, because I'm assuming that people might be familiar with C. So like in C, you just created a file called as hello world. So you save the file with couple of extensions like hello world.cpp if it's an C++ file, or hello world.c if it's an C file. So similarly, when you're working with JavaScript, we also need an extension, right? Because we want to make sure that browser understands the code. So for that, we store the file with an extension called as .js. Okay. So whatever component or the file which you create will be wrapped inside this single live with the ID root. I'll be showing you the demonstration, so it will be give you more clarity, like how things work on the background, like when you take a look in the browser. So for the time being, you need to keep in mind that index.html is one of the core component of your React project, and each and every component which you create will be wrapped inside this div. And then we have couple of additional folders, like we have source folder. So this folder contains a couple of pre-defined components, like when you set up your React project, you have one component already created with you, which is app.js, and that app.js has couple of stylings. So remember, I just showed you a functional component where we had a class name wrapped inside single div. So you have the same thing over here, right? So we have a div and we have provided the class name to that div, and the class name to that div is nothing but the app, right? So the app, where is this app coming from? So this app is coming from the CSS file which we have created. So you can see that we have imported this CSS file. Now dot slash means it's in the same directory. So app.css is inside the same directory. Okay. So dot slash means I want to import a file which is present inside the same directory, followed by the name. Okay. And also you want to add import in front of it because we want to import that file. So if I just go ahead and take a look at the CSS file, so let me just drag it side by side so this can be visible, right? So the class name is nothing but app, and this app has couple of stylings. So this is how you declare your style. So if you take a look, we have an dot before the class name. That's because we are providing class name over here. If we had ID over here, we might have used tag over here, right? So you need to keep in mind. So while using class, we use dot, and while using ID to that specific tag, we use hash. Okay. And then we have couple of additional fields over here. So we'll be writing this from scratch, don't worry. So this is just to give you a brief like how actually the functional component will look like. Now this is a test file, but we don't want to concentrate on this file, so we can ignore this file for the time being. Then we have couple of other file which is called as index.js. Now initially we saw a file called as index.html, and now we are seeing a file which is called as index.js. So we saw that we had an HTML tag called as div with the id as root. So if I just go ahead and open that file again, let me just open it over here. So we had a file, right? Like this was the index.html, and we had an div with the id root, right? So how does React manages to put all the component inside this div? So that's where the index.js comes into picture. So we have a couple of imports over here, right? So what React is trying to do is React is trying to get the ID from your browser DOM. So whatever website you see is displayed inside the DOM. So browser has a DOM, the window which you are seeing has a DOM, and that DOM has an element called as root. So what React eventually does is it gets their specific ID, which is root, and puts everything inside the DOM, right? So you can see that that's what we are doing. So render is responsible for rendering everything inside that div tag, which is called as root. So React DOM, what it does, it just renders all the content inside the root. And what are we rendering? We are rendering nothing but the app, right? And what's actually the app? App is nothing but the component which we create. Okay, so this is how it works. Then we have couple of additional files. These files are not couple importance, but we want to go through these files. Now this file is nothing but package.json. Now this file is responsible for containing all the information related to your project, like what's the name of your project. So let's say if you have created an React project with the name demo, so the name over here will be demo. What's the version of the project, whether the project must be available publicly or your project must be kept private. Then we have an additional field called as dependencies. Okay, so this dependencies usually consist the libraries which you have already installed. So when we set up a React project, we had a couple of libraries already installed. So these libraries were previously installed when we created a React project automatically while setting up a project. And that's what you see over here. Like we installed React, we installed React DOM, and with the version of that specific package which you are installing. So this dependency is nothing but gives you a brief like what packages and what libraries are installed on your systems, and that same thing will be available inside node modules. Okay, so this gives the dependency graph is nothing but it gives you a brief like what projects and what libraries are installed on your React project. Then we had a couple of additional things like the scripts. Now you can perform couple of actions after setting up the React project. The one most concern will be to how can you start a React project, like as we saw earlier that we are setting up a React project using one command. That command will be setting up a React project. We just went through the direction. Now how to start the React project and how does it actually looks like, right? So there are a couple of scripts available over here. Now there are four scripts available over here, but right now we'll be just taking a look at this first script, which is called as start, because this script will be responsible for starting up the React project. Okay, so what does this script says? It says nothing but React script start. So where does this React scripts come from? Remember, we had a React scripts in the dependency, so this already got installed while setting up the React project. So all these things are getting automatically installed when you set up a React project. Now there are a couple of questions coming out. I think we'll be taking a look at this question later. Like one of the question was what are higher order components, but we'll be taking a look at this later whenever we get a time, because this session is solely meant for getting started with React and what are the couple of additional things like what are state props and basic things in React, right? So I will be just coming through these questions in the later 30 minutes, like half 30 minutes of the session. Okay, so this script is responsible for starting your React project, and there is a folder called as start inside the React scripts, right? So if you want to go ahead and check, you can just go ahead inside node module, search for the directory called as React scripts, and inside React scripts we'll be having something called as start. So that start will be responsible for triggering the event which will be starting up your React project, right? And I already have that uh, thing on my system. So if you take a look over here, I already have a React project started, but let's start it again. Okay. So let's say this is the React project. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to start the React project. So right now I am inside the directory where I have created the React project and I have all the files in it. So there are two ways you can start the React project. If you are using yarn, you can just type yarn start. So this start is nothing but the script which you see over here, the start. So if you type yarn start, this should start the React project. Apart from that, if you are using npm, like if you are using Node, you can type npm start. So either of them works fine. So for me, I prefer using yarn, so I will just type yarn. So once I click on enter, you see that the script is getting started, and this will start the React project for us. So you can see that it automatically opens the browser and it's loading the project for us. Okay, and you can see that the project has been loaded. So this is the basic template provided when you set up a React project using the command. Now I just want to let you go through how everything is wrapped inside that specific div we talked about earlier. So if I, by the way, if you want to take how did I open that window, you can click on right click and click on inspect. So this will open a new window for you. Okay, and you can see couple of elements over here, right? So the one element which we saw in the index.html was root. And as I said earlier, that whatever components you create will be wrapped inside that root, right? So you can see that there was a div called as id root, and we are rendering all the components inside that root. So this is the main root, then this is the app component, this is the header part, this is the image which you see. So you can see that everything is wrapped inside that specific div, and that's what we saw, right? Like if I go to the project again, we had a div inside index.html and we had index.js. So inside index.js, we are just grabbing all the components and we are rendering it inside this div which is called as root, and that's what you see over here, right? So we have a div which is called as root, and inside this root we have our component which is nothing but the app component with couple of class. So this is the entire component, this is the header, this is the image, this is the link, and all those stuff. Okay, so this is how actually a React project works. Now let's just start jumping to coding. Like as we already know that what's actually the basic structure of React, and what roles does different files play. So what you need to do is, now since we are grabbing app.js, this is the main file. So this is the first component which gets rendered, right? This is nothing but the app. So I don't want any of this stuff over here. I also don't want app.css. Right now we want to start completely from scratch. So how can you create a component? As I said, you can create a new file with respect to any name which you want. So for us, we already have app.js. So I'm going to start with app.js. So how can you create a React project? Sorry, a React component. So let's just start with the basic things. The very first thing will be to import React from React. By the way, the React is already installed on our system. So this already got installed when we just set up the React project, right? This is the one thing. Then as we said that we'll be working on a functional component. So we can create a function. So we can just create a function with the function name called as app, right? And then now, the one thing which which is important to note, that we always want to export the function which we create so that it can be available for using in different applications, right? So we will be exporting the app. So we notice that we are using the keyword called as default. We are using default because we only want to export a single function which is called as app. So that's the reason we are using a default over here. Okay. So this is how the actual base component will look like. Now, what this component should do, this should return something, right? So this should return an HTML, which should say something like hello from React or something like that. Now, if I click on save, this should automatically get reflected to the browser, like to the project which is already running over here. Okay, so what it does is React supports hot reloading. So whenever you make any changes and save the file, the same changes will be reflected over here. So you can see that we now have something called as hello from React over here, right? So this is something how a basic functional component will look like. Okay, now we can discuss more about this, like what's actually a props and what's actually the state in React component, and then we'll be also taking a look at how can we fetch the data. Because whenever you visit any website, so let's say I'm visiting YouTube, right? And whenever I just reload the application, how is all this data being displayed? So you might be querying server for the data. The server will be responsible for providing you the data, and that same data will be displayed over here, right? So this is how actually this is how it works. So we'll be doing the same thing. So the very first thing which we'll be doing is we'll be just creating a simple state. So just to give you a brief that what actually state is, and I will just take these things side by side so that the code and the project should be visible to you, right? So this is the very first thing. So let's just create a simple counter over here. And in this demonstration, we'll be taking a look at the states in React, right? So let's just get started with it. Okay, so let's just start with the basic state. So what are the things which we need, right? We need two buttons which will be responsible for incrementing a counter, and one button will be responsible for decrementing a counter. But before that, you will be always making sure that whenever to create a component must be wrapped inside a single parent element. That is, this component must only return one HTML element as a whole. And if you seem confused by this, what you need to do is you need to just create this div text, and whatever thing you write should be present inside this div text. Okay. And if I try to uh, send multiple components, you will get an error. Like if I try to pass multiple elements, you should get an error. So let's say if I create a div, so this is one div, right? And if I try to pass another tag, you see that we get an error, right? And what does the error say? It says that your expression must have only one parent element, right? So whenever you create your component must be wrapped inside a single parent element, which is nothing but this div. So whatever things you create should go inside this div. So if I write div, you see that the error is gone, right? Now, so let's just create a simple counter application. So the very first thing is nothing but the UI aspect. So which we need is nothing but button, right? So we need two buttons. So the first one will be responsible for incrementing the counter, and the other one will be responsible for decrementing the counter. So if I just click on save, we should see two buttons over here. Yeah, so we just saw the two buttons over here, the +1 and -1, right? And let's just provide something like states. So the next thing which we want to do is we want to use states. So React already have something called as use state, right? And you can import it in this fashion. You can just import it like use state. And how can you use it? So there are a couple of ways to declare this thing, like declaring a variable. Like you need to declare a variable with const. So this is going to be a constant. Then we have counter and set counter, and then we'll be using this state. So what does this mean? I'll be telling you what does this mean in short time. So if I just type counter over here and just save it, okay, you see that the zero is been displayed in between. Let me just add the style so that it's visible properly. Let's just add app.css and just provide a class name as, so things are visible easily. Yeah, so things are visible in center now. So we have two buttons, which is increment and decrement. Yeah. And what does this state means now? So you can see that we are declaring it in a form of array, right? So this accepts two parameters. The first one is nothing but the counter, and the other one is nothing but the set counter. So these are nothing but the variables and a function. The first thing is responsible for holding the actual value which is present inside the state. So right now, what is this state holding? The state is holding a value which is a number, right? So this is nothing but 0. So the counter is holding a value which is called as 0, and that's what is being displayed over here, right? You can see 0 over here. And what is this set counter? So the set counter is responsible for updating the state. So let's say if I click on a button and I want to make sure that the counter must have the value called as 1, right? So how do we do that, right? So we have an on click handlers over here. So we can just type something like on click, and this will be just responsible for updating the state. So what's the name of the state? We have something called as set counter, right? Because and what this set counter accepts is it accepts a new value, and what this will do is this will automatically update the value of the counter, right? So set counter accepts the new value, and what should be the new value? So the new value should be the previous value plus 1, right? So what's the previous value? So previous value is nothing but 0, and it's stored inside the variable called as counter. So we need to just add counter plus 1, and if I click on save, it should do things for us. Counter. Oh, I just misspelled that. So counter. Yeah. So counter plus. So if I click on this, you see that the value is getting incremented, right? And similarly, now what should we do with the negative button? So we can just copy this thing, and we can just add this over here. And instead of incrementing, we just want to decrement the value. Okay. Let's just decrement the value. Okay, so now if I click on this, the values get decremented, and if I click on this, the values get incremented, right? So in order to give you the generic idea or the brief idea where you can use state is, let's say you're fetching a data from the server, and your web page wants to dynamically render the data. So let's say after every second you want to ping your servers, that server will be responsible for getting the data. And once you get that data, you will be keep on updating the states. You will keep on updating states, right? And that's where the states come into picture. So you can create the variable like this, and you can just feed all the data from your server into the states, and this states will be responsible for updating the values and displaying them on the screen. And that's what we see over here. Okay, so this is something about states. This is the basic idea how actually states look like. Okay, now apart from that, we just talked about something like props. Now props are something which is accepted by the component, and when can you use that prop? So let's say that I have multiple components, so let's just go ahead and create one component. So I'm creating a new component inside the source directory, which is called as demo.js. Okay, and I have couple of things declared inside this that like there's an value called as counter. Now I want to access the value of counter inside some other components, like, so how can I pass the value of counter into some other component or the file which is not already present in this file? So that's where the props comes into picture. So again, if I just go over So again, if I just go over here and just create the basic component, so again, we just imported the React, right? We are accepting the props, and we just have the div, right? So how can you use this component? So what you can do is you can import this component into the other component like this, right? So we want to import demo, and then I will just simply type demo over here. Okay. And if you click on save, nothing will be visible because we are not passing any props right now, right? So what you can do is uh, demo is not defined. Let's change. Already declared demo. Okay, so demo is not defined. Did I misspelled something or something like that? That's strange. This should not actually occur, but not sure why this is happening. That's strange. We are also exporting demo. Let's just rename it to something like demo page and just see whether things are getting exported or not. So demo page. Let's go to this thing is. Oh, did I? Module not found. It says you attempted to import. Oh, I just. That's strange. This should not eventually happen. But if I just try to create another, let's just try to create this component inside the same component and just see whether this works. Yeah, so now it works. I'm not sure what caused this, but this should not eventually happen. So now we can just discuss about the props right now, like when actually props comes into picture. So let's say you have a couple of other components, and if you want to pass the value of counter to other components, so how can you use that, right? So that's where the props comes into picture. And whenever you declare any component, you can write something called as props. So the component accepts something called as props, and then you can just display something like props dot counter, and we should pass the same thing over here, right? So what are we passing? We are passing a variable called as let's just pass c, and let's just pass counter, right? Let's just write props also. So how is this thing working, right? So we created a new component which is called as demo page, right? So we create a new component called as demo page, which is over here itself. And we want to pass the value of this counter to another function, which is that is to another component. And what this component does is this component accepts the props. And what are we passing to this props? We are passing C, right? So how can you access the value? You can access value to props, and this should something like props.c. So if I click on save and close, you should see two values of one. Like if I increment this, you see that the props has been getting passed, like the value is getting passed over here, right? So this is how actually the props works. Okay, so I hope that this gives you brief about the props and what are the states in component. Apart from that, we can eventually take a look at how can we eventually fetch the data from server and then display them on the screen. But for this demonstration purpose, I will just show you that at what part of code you should fetch the data, like when should you fetch the data and render them on your screen, right? So that's where a use effect comes into picture. So let's say if I go to YouTube again, right, and if I click on reload, what you do is you fetch the data and then display the data. So how this works? So for that, I have a dummy API, that is the URL which we can use to fetch the data, and this part of block must go inside use effect. So use effect is an another thing which has been imported from React. So you might be getting familiar with all those stuff as soon as you get started with React, and depending upon the way you design the code. But the very first thing which you need to do is you need to import use effect, and you can use something like this. So use effect will be responsible for fetching the data, right? Okay, and this is how the syntax actually looks like. So whenever we visit any website, like let's say if we are visiting this page, right? So what we need to do is we need to wait until we get the result, right? We cannot directly display the results. So whenever your website gets loaded, we just fetch the result. So how can we fetch the results? We can use this hook, which is called as use effect, and this function gets automatically triggered when you visit the specific website. So in this case, it's nothing but localhost, right? And how can we fetch the website? So there's an default template provided, or I can say default functions provided by JavaScript for fetching the data. So we can use that. And this is nothing but something called as fetch. What this fetch accepts, it accepts the URI from which where we want to get the data. So in this case, we want to get this data, right? So this is nothing but the URL from which we want to get data. So I will just add this URL over here, right? Then I will have dot then block. So what this then is responsible is, whenever you fetch any data, right? What should I do after fetching the data, right? I want to display it. So that's where the dot then blocks comes into picture. So dot then gives the response from server, right? And we want to make sure that the response is good, right? So right now I can just console.log the response, right? So I can just console.log the response and just save it. And if I go to console, like again, you can right click and click on inspect. And if you go to console over here, you should see the data, right? So that's what we saw. Like after fetching the data, we got the response. Okay. But as you can see over here, we don't see the data which we see over here, right? Because this is the JSON data and we are just consoling out the response. So what you can do is you can just console.out the JSON from the response which you get. And if I again click and save, you should see some other couple of steps over here itself. So if I go over here, you can see that you are getting a promise, right? And this should contain all the data which you see over here. Okay. So this is how you can actually fetch the data, and you can just use state to display the data. Okay. And so this gives you a brief about what actually are states in React, what actually are props in React, how can you eventually fetch the data, and how can you eventually render the data on your screen. So I think that eventually covers the basics of React. But the one thing which I forgot to say you is nothing but the disadvantages of React. So what are the disadvantages of the React? So if I go to YouTube and if I again inspect the code over here, like if I click on inspect, or let's say if I view the page source. So if I view the page source, you can see couple of things over here, right? And if I go to React and view the page source, you see nothing, right? You see nothing. You just see this div with the ID of root. Okay. But even though we have couple of things on our web page like counter and all those stuff, we see nothing. Just see this. So that's where the disadvantages of React comes into picture. So if you create a website in React and you host it on any of the domain, so the search engine won't able to find your website because it eventually don't have any content in it, because the web crawlers don't know how to search JavaScript or crawl JavaScript pages. And that's what makes one of the disadvantages of React. And how can you overcome this? So there's something called as server side rendering. So what you can do is you can render the template on the server itself, and then you can use React to display the same on the front page. But all these are quite different topics. So the primary concern was just to give you the brief about React and give you the starting point of the React, right? So this is how things work, and this is one of the drawback of React. uh, Apart from that, I just have couple of things with me, like couple of projects with me which I can show you. Like the one is nothing but a single to-do list, like a simple to-do list. Like, so if I just go ahead to the directory and just try to open this project, so for this I'm using PM. Okay. So now I can just give you brief about couple of demonstration, like how can you create a React project and how things look after you create a React project. Okay. So this is nothing but a simple to-do list where you can just simply keep on adding your to-dos and delete your to-dos or mark your to-dos as done and something like that. Okay. So we will wait until things get loaded over here. Yeah, so this is how the actual looks like. So these are a couple of styling things and couple of components over here. So if I just maximize the screen, right? And what you can do is you can just simply type any to do, like you can type hello and just enter it. Okay, so this will just populate the array. Like if you want to buy bread, you can just add this. It additional functionalities like you can check the to do, you can delete the to do and something like this. This is how you can create the basic to do list. So again, if you want to summarize that what can be different components in this to do list, so one component will be nothing but the search bar, which will be responsible for accepting the content, and we will be having the plus icon in that component itself. And when you click on plus icon, we will be having another component which will be responsible for displaying different to-dos. So this is how the actual to-do list looks like, and I'll be sharing this code base with you guys, so you guys can just traverse through different components and find out how these things are made, how the app is being structured, you know and how different components are being created, how different states are being created, and all those stuff. Okay. Apart from that, I think I also had a couple of additional projects. If I can show you guys, let me just show you guys. So apart from that, you can create a sample chat application like Slack or something. So I can also show you guys that this is. Let me just close couple of things. Yeah. So there are two aspects of this application. The one is the front end, and the other one is the back end. So back end was eventually developed in Node. So I used Node for developing the back end part, and the next session will give you the brief about how can you build back end systems using Node. Then on front end, I used React. Okay, so as you can see that how different paths are communicating with each other, right? So on back end we have Node, on front end we have React. So what you do is you fetch the data from the backend server which you are having and then display them on the screen. So I think this will be a good demonstration that how real-time data travels through screen. So this is basically nothing but a simple messaging application I was trying to build while populating real-time data. So let's say if you try to search any results, you should eventually get popped up immediately without waiting. So this is nothing but the login form. I have a couple of validations over here. So if I want to just log in, I can just log in, right? And this is how actually the application looks like. So let's just go ahead and log in with another user if I can possibly, or we can create a new user itself. So I can just log into it. So gym, gym 123 log in. Yeah. So you can see now that I have logged in through different users. On the first side I have logged in through my email id, and on the other side I have logged in through dummy user which is called as Jim. And you can see lots of conversation between Jim and Swapnil, right? So if I want to type anything to Jim, right, it should eventually get popped up over here, right? So as you can see that ASA has been popped up. And if I go to Jim, yeah, you can see that ASA is popped up over here. So again, you can add a couple of additional things, like you can add subscriptions and all those things over here, where you can just quickly go ahead and populate the data with one you want, right? So right now I'm in PC1, right? So over here I am logged in as something, and over here I'm logged in as something. So let me just go ahead. Oh, on both I have logged in as Jim. Just a second. That's the reason it's not using. Let me just go ahead in incognito. Yeah. So okay. So let me just log in with my user. Yeah. So now this is something called as channels. So if I take a look at the channel, you can see both the contents over here. Now I'm logged in with different user. So you can see that I'm logged in with Swapnil over here, and I'm logged in with some dummy user called as Jim over here. So if I write something like hey Swapnil and hit enter, the same thing should go over here, but should also be visible over here, right? So right now I'm in PC1, and if I reload it, you should see the value over here, right? So again, these things work as expected. So you can see that the value is getting automatically popped up. So if I write hey Jim, hey Jim should get popped up over here. If I write hey over here, hey should get popped up over here. So these are nothing but real-time data. So you can do couple of things with React, as well as developing your backend in Node or something like that, and developing your front end in React. So this is how actually whole things comes together, and this is how the full stack systems get developed. So this is nothing but the real-time data, right? So whatever I'm typing over here is getting reflected to other user itself, right? So these are a couple of channels, and you can also go to different channels or something like that, or different teams or something like that. You can create a new channel over here. You can do lots of stuff. So this is how actual. So this is how you can eventually develop couple of applications and handle different things. So this is one of the idea, like you can just start on with basic something like creating a to-do list or something like that, and eventually traversing to making couple of big projects which is having backend involved, which is also having front end involved, and making those pieces to collaborate with each other and passing data back and forth, right? And just to give you a brief about the tech stack which I have used for this project. So on front end, as I said, I have used React. For designing libraries, I have used Material UI, right? So Material UI is nothing but it provides you a couple of CSS stylings, right? So instead of creating your own styles, you can just go ahead and install this package on your React project. So as I said, you can use npm or yarn. So they have provided you with the command, so you can go ahead to your React project, type this thing, and that must be installed on your project, and you can just follow a couple of docs over here to use this components present right inside this. So one of the component which I used was I think I used header or something like that. So card header and something like that. So I used couple of these components which are present over here, right? Or if you want to use search bar, so you can just go ahead and use all these things. So they have also provided you with the code snippet, so making it things easier. So you can just go ahead with couple of these things. Yeah. And I think yeah, so I think that's all with the basic session of React. I think this gives you a brief like how can you set up a React project, what are states in React, what are props in React, how can you eventually fetch the data, how can you make a collaboration between your backend systems and your front end systems, and all those stuff. Yeah. So I think I can just go ahead and answer a couple of questions right now. Okay. So the very first thing asked was what are higher order components? Now, what are higher? Okay, so what are higher order components? Now, let's say that you have created a couple of components in your project, and you want that components to display couple of stuff, like that is it accepting one component and returning some another component, right? So this is nothing something called as higher order component. So higher order component accepts one component as the input and provides another component as the output, right? So this is how actually higher order components work. In order to go, multiple things. Sorry, in order to take a brief about what higher order components is, you can visit the website. Like they have provided a good way of getting started with things. So they already have things over here, like what's actually a higher order component and how can you use these things. So they have just provided you with couple of demonstration and all those stuff. Okay, so you can just go through these things and just try to implement this thing, that how these components can be created and all those stuff. Okay, then we had a couple of other questions like why use React instead of other frameworks like Angular. Well, why should you use React instead of other frameworks like Angular? Now, that's a really good question to ask. The very first thing which I would like to say is it eventually depends on your project structure. Like, let's say if you want to develop something which is a single page applications where you don't have multiple pages and all those stuff, so you can use React over there. Apart from that, if you want to build large systems, so you can use Angular over there. Now, eventually using React for large applications is also recommended, but it completely, depends on the architecture which you develop, because you can face a couple of issues when we are trying to populate lots of things in React. So I will recommend it using a React, but developing the architecture is one of the primary concerns, right? I hope that answers the question. By the way, the one more reason to use React over Angular is that it's easy to use. So if you just go ahead and create an Angular project, you have bunch of other files. So for each and every component which you create in Angular, you will have separate TypeScript file, you will have separate CSS file, you will have separate uh, component file and all those stuff. So maintaining a code base becomes little more difficult. Whereas in React, everything is plug and play. Like if you create a component and just publish your package over there, so you can use that component in lots of other projects which you have developed, so making it easier and plug and play. More on the other hand, it is faster to develop. Like as you can see that you can develop things faster compared to Angular. This is one of the advantages of React over Angular. Okay. Then there are a couple of other questions like, can you recommend some basic React projects we can try? So as I said earlier, you can just start on with the basic counter. Then you can go ahead with a simple to-do list where you have everything on your front end, no back end involved. Again, the same goes with the counter. Then you can go on for creating something like YouTube search, like the one I posted, where you will be using Google's API for getting the search results, and you will be rendering the same on your thing. And then once you are comfortable with building components and you are familiar with couple of concepts in React, you can just jump ahead towards the backend part, like developing your own small backend and then integrating it with the front end. So let's say if you have developed a to-do list, right? So you don't have backend to the to-do list. So what you can do is you can create a login form, you can maintain each and every user, and then you can store each and to-dos of each and every user, and you can just keep on incrementing that project. Yep. So and then there's another question which says how can we render JS objects and functions in web views? Now I think you can just go ahead and try to find these things out on the internet, because I won't able to explain this thing in brief. all these questions are quite more suitable when we just show the demonstration. So I think I won't able to answer that question right now. Yeah.
Also,
Uh,
I have a
do we have
question.
another? Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So, for a fresher to pick up the skill, so what are the prerequisites that are needed?
Like to start on with React
Right,
or right
right.
now?
Like
Yeah.
as a fresher.
Yeah. So as a fresher, what you can do is I am a prerequisite will be definitely HTML. Just get and brief about the HTML. And apart from that, once you have the brief about HTML, you should go through JavaScript tutorials because the HTML will be solely responsible for displaying contents on the web page. But what about the logic, right? Because on search, you will be having certain logics. On event click, you will be having certain logics to implement. So that's where the JavaScript comes into picture. So basic understanding of JavaScript, basic understanding of HTML, basic understanding of CSS. So once you have the basic understanding of all these things, you can just start on with React. Then we have another question which is saying that is React and React JS same? Yes, both are same. That's not that. This is just the difference in name. Some people prefer React, some people saying React JS. So there's not a difference between React and React JS. Yeah.
Also,
Any other
are
questions?
there any internships available for React, or what are the career opportunities in this field?
Yeah. So if you go to a couple of intentional or all those websites, you can search for a couple of internships over there. So by default, if you take a look, right now I'm working as a full stack developer. So on front end, I work on React. On back end, I work on .NET for developing backend systems. And for cloud, I use AWS, right? So there are lots of opportunities. Like in my company, each and every group uses React for front end. Like each and every team uses front end for React. So React is in great book, and one of the main thing which I saw was the chart. So I think that pretty clear much gives you an idea that how React is much popular compared to other frameworks available in the market because they are robust, easy to develop, they are pluggable. You can use the same component across multiple projects.
Right. So I think if there are no questions, we can move ahead. So thank you so much for sharing your valuable knowledge with all of us and for addressing all the questions too. Uh, so all good things must come to an end, and the same can be said about our session. I consider it a privilege to extend the word of thanks on behalf of the management and all the students of our college. I take the honor to thank our speaker, Mr. Swapnil Mistry, for gracing this event with his presence and sharing his valuable knowledge with all of us. To summarize the session, React.js is an open source JavaScript library designed by Facebook for creating rich and engaging web applications fast and efficiently with minimal coding. The core objective of React.js is providing the best possible rendering performance, and instead of working on the entire web app, React.js allows a developer to break down the complex UI into simpler. Also, we have been fortunate enough to be backed up by our constant support and guidance has made the event possible. Lastly, thanking all my fellow students for showing interest and making this event a grand success. Thank you very much and have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
Also, I've posted the feedback form link. Please do fill it. Thank you so much.